Got contact. All right, everybody, thank you so much for joining us for this session. I am Laura Mcdonald Stewart. I am one of the advisory board members for ArcLight Summit this year, and I just want to welcome you guys. And I'm going to be welcoming our wonderful speaker. This is Jan Lennox Moyer. And Jan began her lighting design career in 1976, working on many diverse projects, from the Defense Intelligence Agency's first home in Washington, D.C., to winery caves, which I would love to see, entertainment gardens, and botanical gardens. She began specializing in landscape lighting in the mid-1980s and wrote the essential book used around the world, the Landscape Lighting Book. She began teaching in undergraduate school at Michigan State University, next at the University of Michigan, then at the Academy of Art, SF, UC Berkeley, Rutgers, and the Lighting Research Center, among others. Currently, Jan is finishing the last of 20 videos for a new educational platform that Garden Light LED is producing with the IESNA called Learn Night Light. Please welcome Jan.
Thank you. Oh, gosh. I forgot to work out how I'm going to see my notes, because my notes are not up here. So I'm going to wing it. Good luck to you guys. What I want to talk about is that in 2021, the IES wanted to start a discussion about the language of lighting. And they started with Bill Warfel's doing an interior discussion in LD&A. And he had written guidelines, and so I thought that I needed to share with you guys, since I'm doing the second one. I did an online lecture and an article for LD&A, which came out, I think, last month or the month before, and now this. Share with you not the guidelines, but the issues that are important for us to think about in the difference between interior lighting and landscape lighting. Oops, and I have to show you this. I don't have anything to say about it, except that I agree. But here's the 6 things that I'm going to cover in this. We want to plan power distribution for the site from the beginning, and we want to plan that power for the entire life of the garden so that we don't have to rip up the garden later when we need to add more, and we will always need to add more. We need to study the plants. Buildings and hopefully pathways don't change, but the planting will always be changing through the seasons of the year, from baby plants to mature plants. Then they die, then they get added. It just goes on and on. I start my design with downlighting, and it's really important to think about that because it gives us the ground plane around us. It helps people understand the space that they're in, and then everything else I fill in after that. Set up your fee structure for the lighting task you'll need to accomplish. It will vary from one project to another, the kinds of things that you need to do. So that's the way I plan my fees. Include time in your fees for aiming. If you can believe it, there are some people in the United States that never aim their landscape lighting. I don't understand, even if they do a great job. I've been doing this for over 46 years. I will never not go to a site and aim the lights. You can make these nuanced changes that make all the difference in the world. And think about the maintenance task needed to ensure the integrity of your design. It's critical. It's the only thing that allows your design to keep looking as beautiful as it does the night that you leave it. So let's start with this guy. This is the view across the lake from the boathouse on a big project. And there was nothing very special about this space, so it's only just some very soft downlighting that allows you to see the space and enjoy the space and move through the space. Now, this is the cover of my new book, which I've brought 20 copies of if you're interested in the next room. And this is a typical Sonoran desert tree. It's an ironwood tree. And you can see its canopy goes from here to there over all of this paving. And there are some planting areas on either side. But there's so much traffic around this circle, and then there's a path going off this way and a path going off this way, and the garages are here. And you can see there's a path going off that way and there's a path going off that way. There was no way I was going to try to put fixtures either in those beds around the edges of the tree and the edges of the paving or into the paving. So what I had to do was to make that tree look beautiful in a smaller version of itself. And that's what I did. So you can see the branching structure, and you can see up into the top of the tree, and you can see a little bit of brightness at some of the edges, but it's just much smaller than it used to be. And the main thing that I wanted people to experience in this scene is not the tree, as stunning as it is. Interestingly enough, it looks way better on my screen than it does on this screen. Don't know why. But notice what I did. I carefully balanced the brightnesses between the brightness here and the brightness there, the brightness here and the brightness there. And notice that I left everything around the tree's structure dark, so that it really shows up. And then you continue on and on into that garden. So when we start landscape lighting, we have to think about what is going to happen in this space. And I don't know why it is, but some people in the United States like to use black front doors. How do you make a black front door the most important thing in the view of an arrival scene? It's not easy. So all of this lighting around the door is important, but I had to show you, I had to give you visual cues to take you to that front door. So here they are. There's a downlight in this tree that's showing you this. There's some downlights in here that are doing this. There's a downlight here that's doing this. So what I'm showing you is the extent and the shaping of that center island. Then I'm showing you the other side of the driveway here with the downlighting and the uplighting, and the same thing here with the downlighting and the uplighting of this palm tree. And then putting as much light as I can on the stairs, which I don't normally do, but in this case it was really important. And that wasn't enough. I convinced the owner to put these little piles of pumpkins for this time of year and whatever else she could do at other times of the year to help people see that's where the front door is. And I'm going to show you something off to the left of this in a couple of slides. But first, I want to talk about how there's a lot of things that are different about landscape lighting from interior lighting. And the lighting is the same. We still need to use the same principles and all that, but the process is different. This was not my first day on this project. This was the first day that the house had been built. And we were starting to see the context of the existing trees with the house, and still there was no new planting that will be going to be there. And that's often how we start on projects. Either they're completely mature gardens that we're working on, or there's nothing there yet. So we have to study the plans. And I want to study the plans, including all of the plants, whether I'm going to light them or not. And I need to understand the characteristics of the plants that are important to lighting. For example, I need to know the shape of the tree and how that might change over time. I need to know the size of the tree and how that might change over time. So clearly, change is an important aspect that we're thinking about here. And time. It could be that it's a fast-growing tree and it might be mature in 2 or 3 years. It could be that it's a California live oak and it will be mature in 200 or 300 years. And we need to understand that as well. Then we need to understand the leaves and the flowers and the trunk characteristics. And how is this property going to be maintained? So there's a lot that we need to study, trying to put ideas together about how to approach this site. So this is the area off to the left from that earlier site. This is the entrance to the guests' quarters on this property. And you go through this gate. Notice that the gate, including the latch for the gate, is clearly lit. as an arrival issue. And then once you walk through, you get to see more of the garden in that space. So one of the things that we need to think about is the wiring from the beginning. We need to plan wiring for what we're putting in now and for what we're going to need in the future, both in the controls sizing, the wire sizing, and the transformer sizing, so that there's room to add more beyond the 80% reduction that the NEC requires for you in not overloading a transformer. So notice I'm showing the transformers here, and an arrow here which says the control load, and then I'm showing a wire over to the tree, but no more wires, because the plans get so messy with wires, which the contractors aren't going to use that location anyway, because that's not the right way to do it. It's just showing you what is connected to each other. So looking more closely at this, you can see transformer 28, it's 12 volt, it's 900 watts. It's a low voltage direct burial transformer. And then it's going off to load 304, and here's the connection to this tree for the tree mount down lights, which occur on a different sheet, and the up lights, which don't show them, but they show which transformer they're on and what lamping goes in them in their designation on the sheet. So back at this front entry, here's the arrows that I was talking about, how I'm preparing that view to help people move from the long, dark driveway that they're driving down. It was almost a mile, and when they arrived at this space. And notice that with one fixture, I lit the trunk of this palm tree, lit the top of this amazing wall, and, of course, the most important element, that fabulous bird. It doesn't take much. That's another thing I want you to think about in landscape lighting. It doesn't take much. And we'll talk about that more as we go. There are times in landscape lighting that we need to think about change in the beginning. This was a hedge that was put in the 1800s. And this big tree that's back here now may not have even existed then, but that property goes long past the hedge. So in the early conversation with this client and the team, the landscape architect and the contractors, we talked about whether or not we should cut a hole in that hedge. It was a big deal. And lighting designers don't normally get included in those conversations, but it was important in this case because we wanted you to get a sense that this property extends. And that is the only thing that's lit in the back. So it's primarily just a view. But it's not complete. Notice that I've lit some smaller trees, which of course are going to grow up, much brighter than the big tree. As a matter of fact, the big tree has no lighting on it at all. All of that lighting is from the lighting of these little trees. But the big thing that's the most important element in this scene is missing, the bench. It hadn't arrived from England yet. So here it is before we cut the hedge. And notice that there are these big trees with big branches that hang over the hedge, luckily on both sides. That's where I mounted my fixtures. And you can see that big tree, how do I tell you where it is? Right here. That's the big tree. So we hadn't cut the hole yet. And you can see the big branches. And here's the bench in place. This is also a change. You can see the trees have grown up quite a bit, and we've changed from incandescent to LED. That's something that happened a lot over the last 10 years. And the big issue of changing from halogen to LED is the reduction in energy. 75 to 90% reduction in energy from halogen to LED. That's significant, and that makes LED worth it. And that's about it in making LED worth it. For those of us that grew up with halogen, we're still not convinced. But the good thing about LED is that the leaf color is much more vibrant because the LED that we use is the bright blue LED that Sushi Nakamura came up with that allowed LED to be useful in architectural lighting. excuse me, I am completely wrong here. This was still incandescent. This is the LED, and you can see the trees have still grown a lot more and they've gotten bigger. And you can see the difference. It's much more vibrant. And there it is, the finished scene with the bench. And notice how small the bench looks. It's a normal sized bench. It's a deep garden. The reason that this, all of this, is brighter than anything else, with the possible exception of the brightness that I put at the edges here to show you the undulation of the bench, is because whenever you're doing landscape lighting, you want to bring someone's eye back down to the ground so that your eye doesn't get stuck up in the sky. So I've mentioned change. Change is a big issue that we have to be aware of and respond to constantly in landscape lighting. And once you start a landscape lighting project, you're on the project until the house is sold. I just have a client that called me last week. I've been working on their house in Northern California since the 1990s, and they're selling the house. That happens. And other changes happen, like this one. This is one of the radical changes. I'm going to show you a couple radical changes. Here it was, all the big trees got planted by December of 2004. And the landscape architect said, okay, why don't you come in August of 2005? I'll have all the rest of the plants installed. And you can see me out there, and you can see my flags. I'm flagging all of that so they can start installing the fixtures. And then I got a call to come back in December 2005. That's the same scene. Actually, if it could, I'm glad it wasn't that. The owner said, I don't want all that. And luckily, this was a 300-acre site, so the trees didn't get killed. They got moved. But that's a radical change from that. And you can see there are still fixtures in here that don't belong there. So I had to now go and take all the fixtures out and redo the lighting. So one of the issues we want to think about is staying in touch with the landscape architect all the way through the project. And in both that project and this project, it's not easy because well into construction, in both cases, the landscape architect got fired. And so we had to finish both projects without the landscape architect. This one was a much bigger issue because this is in Bermuda. So anytime you're working in the islands, everything's a big issue. There's no supplies, so you've got to bring everything over. This was the main concern that brought me initially to this site, and that was going to be this feature between the house and the pool level. And the landscape architect gave me full plans for that water wall, and I did all of the design and documentation for that. And then I got this call one December asking if I could please come to the site. The electrical contractor was trying really hard to follow my drawings, and he just couldn't make sense of it. And I thought, okay, I've got to go help this guy figure it out. And when I got there, I realized there is no relationship between what's been built and my drawings. There's no relationship. So we had to try and figure it out. So you can see Jessica up here with a big placard, because this was such a big space, with a number on it. This is now planting pocket number whatever it was. And we're trying to redraw the planting pockets so that we can make some sense out of them. And you can see in the planting pockets, we've already got power pulled. We've already got transformers sitting there, but not put down into the ground yet, because nobody knows what to do. So we tried really hard, but we couldn't figure it out. So you can see in exasperation, we called the client and asked him to come out and help us figure it out. And the problem still was nobody knew what was going to be planted, because remember, the landscape architect had been fired. And there was no new landscape architect involved. So here was the original plan. You can see it's all nicely labeled, and I've colored it so I can understand the relationship of one thing to another. And here's my drawings that shows everything nicely done. And here's the next version of the plan after that meeting. you can see everything went away, everything, except for the power distribution, the controls, and the transformers. And I would make notes. I think I should have a closer one. I would make notes saying, this is the old one, this is the original one. So I showed all the fixtures, and I've got what fixture type it is, what lamp, what transformer, what load, and this is the new one. So I've got a note that says, my eyes are not as good as they used to be. Provide for up to 3, SA3, and or SC on this transformer and that load, so that the contractor can bid the project. Now, it didn't matter so much in this one. We've already wasted the client's money, and we can't help that at this point. But on all the rest of my projects since that project, what year was it? 2007, I have never put another light fixture on a plan, ever, except for fixtures in trees and fixtures mounted on walls and path lights, things that won't be affected by changes like this. And it really depends. Sometimes I won't even put those because I don't trust that it's not going to change. So what I do is I either flag the property after the plants have been installed, or I will actually bring out the fixtures. And in this case, on this one, this is a mock-up happening, and on this one, it's an actual installation. So I'm flagging here, and we're bringing out fixtures here. And then we start making the notations of what we're doing. But we don't actually finish that until record documents. And in record documents, if the fixture ended up here instead of there, we're not going to change it because it just doesn't matter. It's in the vicinity, and nobody ever measures this. There's no reason to. So it doesn't matter. So we need to understand the plant material, and what I think about is the form of the tree, the shape of the tree, how much it's going to change over time, how it's going to change from one season to another throughout the course of 1 year, and then how much it will change from year to year. And then I get down to the details. What happens with the leaves? So here's front lighting, back lighting, and a combination of front and back lighting on all of these plants. Front lighting, back lighting, front and back lighting. And you think, when you get to this leaf, that it's going to be similar to that leaf because it looks like it. But look what happens on this one, and it doesn't happen on that one. So if I'm not familiar with the leaf, I will cut one leaf off from a tree and actually put light in front of it and light behind it to see how it responds to light. Because the amount of diaphanous, I don't know how to say that. Thank you. How diaphanous it is, or how dense it is, makes a huge difference in the way the tree will look when it's lit. And it's not just the leaves, it's also the trunk. You can see I've got peeling or flaking, I've got fruit or nuts growing on the trunk. I'm showing striped or patterned, deeply furrowed over here, and what is that one? It's thorned, but that's not the right word. Notice on the deeply furrowed, and the object is, am I trying to show pattern or am I trying to show texture? If it's pattern, then I can wash it very softly. If it's texture, then I need to graze it, like I've done here with the deeply furrowed. And notice that this trunk is not as bright as the canopy. Usually it's not, but I will show you, I think, a couple of times when I've made the trunk brighter. There aren't many times, but there are sometimes. So we need to think about these changes. If you don't know the genus, the species, and the variety of the plant, and you got this tree instead of that one, you'd be in trouble. You would have planned for the wrong tree. So you have to know all three of those. And that came from Linnaeus back in the 1700s, and it is still being done and changed constantly today. So we need to look at whether it's dormant, goes dormant, or not, and the difference between in-leaf and dormant. And quite frankly, I like this better than that. So you're allowed, I give you permission to make judgments about how the plants will look from one season to another. It's important. And you can see that in this case, this young tree is keeping its same shape, but growing up and opening up. And most trees open up as they mature. And the reason for that is if they don't, then it's hard to get light into the bottom of the tree. But not all trees do. So that's the difference between an open canopy and a dense canopy. You've got to really think about that. Some leaves, this one happens to be a Norway maple. The leaves are about the size of my hand, and they just pile on top of each other. So it's really difficult to get light up. You can see how dark it is right here, and all the way through there. That's showing you that light is not getting up to the sky. And then there's this tree. This is still another birch. All of these drawings have been birches so far. And some of them change a lot, like this one does. This one's changing its shape completely. Some of them only get bigger, but we need to understand that. And we need to understand the time frame. It could be a few years to a few hundred years. So we need to understand how that's going to affect the property and the work that we're going to have to do on that property forever. And if it's not us, we've got to make sure that the client knows who is going to do that. I have some projects where I've trained the landscape maintenance teams, and others where I've trained other people that I work with to go back to those projects. They're still going back to those projects. So one of the biggest mistakes that I've seen over my entire career when someone starts landscape lighting is that they use too much light. Look at this poor little tree. It's just, it's obliterated by the amount of light compared to this tree, which you can see, look how beautiful the lighting is on its trunk, and you can see all the way up into the canopy. And it's pretty typical that it's going to be brighter at the bottom than it is at the top, especially with big trees. But you can see it doesn't have to be that way. In this tree, I've got 5 ring mount downlights, which is doing all of this and all of this, up to that point where I had to use path lights, which you can see the difference. How that looks compared to that. I don't know if we should take a vote, but who's going to vote for that? But notice the difference between this and that. This is one fixture underneath the low branch in those trees. You should never have a fixture underneath a low branch because you get exactly that hot spot. Now, this is too much light to begin with, which just proves my point that people use too much light. So what they should have done with this is use way less light to begin with, but when they were putting these trees in, if they insisted on having this line of fixtures, then they should have twisted the tree so there wasn't a low branch there. And you could say that that it doesn't matter, but you've got to be careful to not have that low branch be too bright because it will throw off your whole scene. So what am I telling you here? Oh, I guess this, did I go backwards? No? Okay, I'm just showing you this scene again to compare it with the way it was. This is the beginning of the week, and this is the end of the week, and that's the tree we're talking about. And look, you couldn't even tell what the tree looked like. At the end, it's still bright enough to be one of the focal points and enough to enter you into the forest and take you through the forest to reach these chairs. But at least you can identify it now, and there isn't this black hole which they started with in the beginning. So one of the things that I try to do when I'm approaching a specific tree, and that's like every specific tree on the plan, is how can I get a fixture, the one fixture placed to go the furthest up the trunk possible without a branch stopping it. And sometimes it's not possible, but that's what I look for. And even if there isn't a place, I'll still look for the best place. And so whether it's an uplight or a downlight, it doesn't matter, but that's what I start with. And then once I've got that, then I can fill in the trunk with the rest of the fixtures. So here's a tree where there's probably 10 fixtures for the canopy and 2 fixtures. You can see them right here. There's one here and there's one here. Look how beautiful that trunk is. It really shows the line connecting it to the ground, and it shows the texture, and it completes the form. And you can see there's light almost all the way up. It's a little bit dark at the top. And in many cases, it just doesn't matter. Sometimes I don't even light the outside of the canopy, like on that original tree that I showed you. I just light underneath the canopy as long as the branching structure is showing. So the branching structure is really, really critical for me. And here's two different approaches on the same project. This one, I've got a ring mount downlight mounted somewhere in here. And you can see when it's a multi-trunk tree like this one, how beautiful it is to see the inside of the branches instead of just lighting it from the outside, which is what I did here. And I can't tell you if I couldn't find a location to do a ring mount on that one, or the fact that you can see this is the end of the entrance of the driveway, and then there's a parking area over here. So the house is right there. You can see part of the house right here. And at the house, there's a big water feature, and, you know, the front door is lit. So hang on one second, and I'll answer your question. So I lit this tree brighter than this one to help bring your eye in. And is it too much brighter? Looking at it today, I think so, but I'm taking it out of context by not showing you the whole scene. Yes, question? It's not a directional fixture, it's literally a ring mount. So think about the fixture being just a little tiny fixture this size, and on the top of it, if this is the top of the fixture, there literally is a ring. And you just hang it with a what do you call it? No, do not do it with a zip tie. No, no, no. With a ring, a hook that you screw into the tree. And then once you've hooked it on, what I do is I pinch the hook a little bit closed so in the wind it doesn't fall off. And the reason to use ring mounts is because they're so much smaller, they're so much lighter. You don't have any aiming, although I have aimed them by drilling a hole in the front of the fixture and using fishing wire to aim it. But I try not to do that anymore because it's kind of a maintenance nightmare. The idea is that you can get way further out on the branches. Now, here I was using it in the middle of the tree, so I probably could have used a tree mount downlight instead of a ring mount. But I just typically use ring mounts because that's the way I'm thinking about it always, because I have to be prepared for a very, very small branch. And often it is only a very, very small branch when I'm going in there, but also it allows me to light all the way out here on trees as well. The next thing we want to think about is pruning. I'm trying to find where I put my drink. Oh, it's over here. We need to think about pruning. And that's another of the changes we need to be aware of in landscape lighting. We don't do the main pruning of the trees, obviously. The arborists do that. And they do the pruning for health, beauty, and health, beauty, and there's a third thing. I can't think of it. It's in those notes that I don't have. We do pruning to help the lighting. And the two things that we're looking at for that is removing those darn lower limbs, and you want to do that when they're small so that you're making a small cut on the tree. And you don't want to do it until the tree's big enough that it's got enough energy that it won't miss that energy production part of the tree. And so that's the first one, raising the canopy. And the second one is taking out branches on the inside of the tree to open up the tree. The arborists often do this, and we don't have to even think about it, because that's for the health of the tree. It allows air to move through it, so the tree's less likely to blow over in a big storm, and we're having too many of those these days. But it also gives more sunlight penetration down into the tree. So here's how that looks, and you can see the tree just looks pretty when you've done this. Also, it often improves the appearance of the tree when we do that. And I will never do that without the owner and the architects being, the landscape architects being involved, or the arborists, or the arborist. So at ILI, you guys all know about ILI, the International Landscape Lighting Institute. It's a class that's given now twice a year. Hopefully that will continue. It's a 5-day, 5-night course where as attendees, you work as a team to do a full-scale mock-up. And we have all kinds of lectures and demonstrations and then the work sessions. This is one of our demonstrations. Our pruning expert, Dr. David Warfel, comes in and lights a tree before it's pruned. We look at that one night, and then he prunes it. And you can see the difference. What has he done? He's raised the canopy, and he's done some, but not much, opening up of the canopy, because that's still a very young tree. And this is that same tree a couple of years later in the fall as it's starting to lose its leaves. And you can see how you are seeing openings all the way up into the canopy. And this is David, and he has just finished pruning this tree, and this is the amount that he pruned off of that tree. That's a lot, and that's why he looks so tired. But what he tells us is not ever to prune more than 30% of the branches on a tree for the tree's health in 1 year. So here we are installing, and you can see Dawn is just praying that this is going to go right. And what we're doing is trying to flag the locations so that we can get as much work done during the day as we possibly can, but then we need to aim the fixtures at night. And I won't let any fixtures be located, either the stems, the stake stuck into the ground, or the below-grade fixtures dug into the ground, until we've done a night check on it for the aiming. And you can see here we've got multiple arborists up in this tree ready to go. And so this is where you can see I'm starting to make notes about the final things, the final decisions that we're making. And this photograph was like 10 minutes before one of the biggest storms I've ever experienced came. Yes. We had to get the tree guys down out of the tree as quick as possible, and we ran as fast as we could to the outdoor chapel, and that's when the lightning hit, which threw me 30 inches. It was amazing. We had to get out of there as fast as we could. Wild, yeah, that's landscape lighting. So I want to talk about maintenance, because we need to get the client to understand maintenance. They take care of their landscape. They understand maintenance of that. Maintenance of landscape lighting is nothing compared to that, because we don't have to come. Some people have people come every week. Some people have people there every day. Some people have people only once a month, or once every 2 months, or whatever it is, but it has to be done regularly. It's not as much work for landscape lighting. What we have to do is clean out the tops of the fixtures if they get debris in them, which they will. We have to clean any debris off the walls of the fixtures so they don't corrode. We have to check the aiming. That's the most important thing. On a regular basis, and depending on the project, if it's a new installation, I want to do it every 3 months the first year, because I don't know how much the project's going to change. And then it might be once a year or once every 3 years, depending on how much the garden is changing. And the thing that's important about this is, if you do the little bit of maintenance that it takes, which is maybe one night in the beginning, of just checking if the fixtures are tightened properly, if clean them out, are they aimed properly, has a lamp burned out, which will happen with LEDs. No, I forgot where I was going with this. Oh, the little bit of work that we need to do regularly really doesn't cost the client much, but if they don't do it, it can become a big deal a few years later, and I've had that happen on a project. So I'm showing you this because this is a garden space that we can use for the mock-ups at the Landscape Lighting Institute. It used to be when it was in New York. And this was the very first one that was done in the fall and then in the snowstorm in the winter. And this was the next one that got done. And you can see they took a different approach. They were lucky enough to have the reeds left in. I think I had taken all the reeds out this year. And they chose not to make the Colorado blue spruce blue and to make this more consistent. there was a whole different use of the property from this time to that time, which informed that choice that the designers made. Back in this project, you couldn't see this tree from up at the house, so as you walked down, which was an event because there weren't any events down at the pond at that time, then you got this surprise. Now there are more events going down at the pond. So this is the second one. Here's the third one, and you can see it's another big difference in the way they're approaching it, much more consistent, and you can see the designers and the mentors talking about it as we're going through the class. Here's another one about 3 years later, and look, it's getting softer, and they're doing more, and look, they've decided to highlight the sculptures over here, and here's the last one that I'll show you. And the big thing that I want you to take from this, well, two things. One is that we all have different ideas, and there's so many options of what we can do before we hit that line in the sand where it just doesn't work. And we've got to be careful about that, which is why understanding all the things I'm trying to get you to think about is so important. And then the other thing is, you can see how tall some of these trees are. It doesn't take much light. It doesn't take much light. I can do, this is all incandescent still, I can do this same thing with, at max, a 7-watt lamp today in LED. That's all it takes. And I might use a 45-degree beam spread. I might, and less likely, use a 30-degree. I might, on this tree, which is way further back, I might use a 30-degree on that one, because you can see all we're really doing is the top of that tree. So back to this. The big thing about this is when you're done at the Landscape Lighting Institute, the mock-ups come down. And so you're back to just darkness again. And whenever anybody, I would cry every next night after the Landscape Lighting Institute, but when a client has seen something and then you take it away, they're very sad. And the reason I tell you that is it makes that much difference in our lives. It really does. Brooke and I, my previous partner and I, are giving a talk in Philadelphia, Illuminate Philadelphia, on how landscape lighting affects our health and well-being. And we really believe that it does. So this is all the stuff that you need to think about in maintenance documentation and the maintenance schedule. Cleaning and lubrication. And lubrication is every time you open a fixture, you want to put anti-seize compound on the parts that will go together so that they come out again. Relamping and lubrication, pruning, adjustment and refocus, parts replacements. You want to have all the spare stuff that you need on site, especially in Bermuda or the Bahamas or any of those islands. And then you need to think about design adjustment. And when you get down to this line, that is when you may need to bring me back in or you guys back in instead of just the maintenance guys that are taking care of the lighting doing the work. So in my maintenance guidelines, I show things like this that talk about how you do the work, what the aiming means, and then the last thing is always to turn the glare shield so that you can't see this inside of the hood, because that will become the brightest thing in the field of view if you don't turn it. So the last thing we do after doing all the adjustments is turn that hood so that you can't see it from the main views. And here's opening up the fixture and putting on the anti-seize compound. And then whether you're in New York or Arizona, where we spend a lot more time in our gardens at night, you know when we don't spend time in our gardens at night? In the summer. It's too hot. So from now, literally this is the week, from now until June, we'll be living in our gardens again. And so you want to think about what can you do to help them enjoy that space and use that space and still make it comfortable. You can see that you're not seeing any brightness of fixtures. You can see one brightness here, that's in the lawn, and you can see a little bit of brightness here. That's because it's the fixture is shining a little bit onto the rocks, and maybe I should have moved that a little bit more, and the same thing here, a little bit on the rocks. But you're not seeing the brightness of the inside of the glare shield or the lamp itself, and it makes the space much more comfortable. And then I'm just going to fleetingly say that even though I've left the snow, there's nothing better than lighting in snow. And it might be just a fleeting moment. There's the snow that's happening in the snowstorm at night, and it might be there until noon the next day and be gone. But you want to experience it. There's nothing as fabulous. So that kind of brings up the thought about, these are now bare trees. They don't look bare because of all the snow on the branches, but they're bare trees. So how do you decide the difference between what you're doing with the lighting from summer to winter? And what I believe is that if you have lit the tree properly for the winter, it will work in the summer. And here we are with a very, very quiet scene. This is a remote garden that they look at from the house, and so you can see all the way along the runnels and to the waterfall, and a little bit of light. And notice here how I've done something that I told you the opposite of. It's brighter here than it is here, and that's to bring your eye all the way down there, and have it end there, and then not go up any higher in the sky than that. And I'm leaving you with these 4 images. My original book, my new book, which is the one I have 20 copies of, the Learn Nightlight session, which you can get through Garden Light LED and through the IES Learn portion of their website, and ILI. And if you want to contact ILI about taking one of the courses, this is their email. And if you go to that email, it'll take you right to the course. Any questions? Yes?
How often, if ever, do you use color?
You know, that's one of the things that's up to the client and you, and you'll notice that I have shown you none. I have done it twice in my entire career of 46 plus years. So it depends, and actually I'm doing a project right now, so this will be number 3 where we're doing it. But I'm not doing it on the plant materials. I'm doing it on the buildings, and it's for the entrance of a new development in Arizona, and you could ask why. I do. But we're using color on the letters of the name Blossom Rock, which is the name of the new community. So I don't, because I know and believe that plants have their own color, and so do the building materials and sculptures. And I'm a naturalist, so I want it to be natural. Now, that said, I am not saying that you shouldn't. There are definitely times that it's fun to do that, whether you're at Disneyland or having a party in your backyard. But what I think personally, and this is just my feeling, it's too much to live with all the time. It's like having Christmas lights up all year, which some places do in Arizona, and that I don't understand that either. It's like, how can it be that special if it's up all year? So I hope that answers your question. Yeah. Yeah. And it's really up to you and the client. If you and your client love it and they can live with it, then go for it. Just be careful to still make it a cohesive composition that's livable. Yes?
So this is called Deciphering the Language, but I noticed you were staying away from a lot of the typical terminology that I've heard about moonlighting.
Moonlighting is a bad term.
Yeah, so I'm just love to know how you address some of those terms in the conversation around this.
Yeah, and the reason I haven't talked about things like that is I think that that's really not as important as this. This language is what you need to understand. But let's talk about moonlighting. Moonlighting was a term that John Watson started back in the 1960s when he was using almost exclusively mercury vapor. And it was his belief, and I agree with him, that mercury vapor looked like moonlight. He would put fixtures way up in the trees and shine down through them. My problem with that, besides the fact that it's I use the term dappled light instead. And other people have other terms for it. It's just a matter of shining light down through the leaves, which I do to get light on leaves that are on branches way out that I can't downlight any, or that can't light any other way, and to create those beautiful patterns on the ground. They're so beautiful.
So when you run the wiring of those trees for the dappled lighting, how do you go about, attaching those things in ways that are sensitive to the tree?
Clearly, you don't have the landscape lighting book.
No, I do.
Because I wish I could say it's on page something, but it's in the book, and actually there's several pages about it. It's really critical how you attach fixtures to trees. I don't ever, this is going to surprise you, I don't ever attach cables to trees. What I attach is the eyelet on the cable attachment. So the cable is actually free. It's just the cable tie that's attached to the tree, and the cable's going up through the eyelet. I put those about every 3 to 5 feet, depending on the shaping of the branches, and then I use the very simplest tree mount canopy. It's just a straight plate. You don't ever want anything touching the trunk, which is why I don't want the cables touching the trunk. Not for the fact that it can get thrown over and will get thrown over, and we've seen many installations where landscape lighting attachments have been thrown over, but because anything touching the bark on a tree can open that tree up to attack from pests and diseases. So that's why I use this flat plate. It's not attached to the tree. It'll be at least 2 inches off the tree, depending on how quickly the tree grows. The way trees grow is that the trunk grows like this, and so do the branches. So you've got to give them room to spread out. So I use hanger bolts. And you've got to get the hanger bolt to go into the heartwood, but then leave enough of the threads, about this much, so that the plate is that far away from the tree. And it's all in that book. Any other questions? Yes?
Just on the color temperature of the light.
Yep.
I know you're looking for blue light, but you have a specific one. And except we're an LED, I know you used to use a lot of metal color and stuff.
Yeah.
Right, but so
Yeah.
what would you like?
What I use primarily with LED is 3000. I sometimes use 2700, depending on the color of the trunk. For example, in Arizona, we have Palo Verde trees. The trunk is green, so I use 3000. But if you're doing a redwood tree, where the trunk is a beautiful copper brown, you want 2700. And I sometimes use 2700 for pathways or some, especially if it's a dirt pathway, or some other areas. And I don't mind putting both in as long as it works, as long as there's
Against that reflective surface. And
Yeah.
That's kind of what you're looking for. So we have a lot of rainbow eucalyptus that are just really, really amazing. Right?
Cool.
But they have both of those kind of color things in it.
3000.
So
3000. You have a question up here in the front?
What was the difference between your two books?
Oh, huge difference. Huge difference. This book is all the technical information you'll ever want to know, and all of my thinking about how I approach projects from the beginning to the end. Everything about record documents, everything about contract documents, everything about specifications, blah, blah, blah. Every technical thing. This one is inspirational photographs. Full color, all the way through. It's thousands of photographs. And it's something to give you ideas. It's something to be able to show your client ideas. Yeah, exactly. Finally.
Thank you.
Yes.
So, in this day and age, are there good, solid, like battery-powered fixtures that you can use outside, where you don't have to walk down?
We're all still waiting for that. And I'm not saying that it won't happen someday, but it hasn't happened yet.
Yes, same thing.
Yes.
So how do you address, I heard somebody else mention something at Light Fair
And the ones that were hunting, which in that place was the owls, they stayed right outside that light so nobody could see them. And when somebody came in that they wanted, they swooped right in and got them. So my point is that if you're doing landscape lighting respectfully, it won't be a problem. And so that means you do have to be careful about how you're doing stuff lighting. You want it to be going onto something, not up into the sky.
And then what about turtle friendly?
Turtle friendly is a completely different animal, I believe. I don't live in Florida, so I don't know all the considerations or the conditions. But whenever I've seen it on TV, you know, the little turtles are coming, are they called turtles at that point? Little babies are coming up and they're trying to get to the, what are they called? Hatchlings, thank you. The hatchlings are trying to get to the water. There's nothing around them. So why would there be any light? There shouldn't be any light. That's my opinion. I was working in Palm Beach one time, and there was huge honkers. That's a very technical term. On these houses that were just going, right? And that should not be allowed, period. That could easily affect the turtles. But if you do have lighting, then you have to be careful of the color, because the turtles are looking for the moon and the stars to lead them to the water, so it can't be blue. It can't be blue. It can't be any more than 3,000. It should be less than 2,700. 2,400, I think, is the standard that's acceptable. Is it 2,000? Or straight amber, yeah. No blue is, no blue. But who's lighting down there? I mean, it makes no sense that anybody's lighting down there. There must be something about Florida that I haven't seen. I don't know what. Any more questions or do you want to? Yay! It's next door.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Can I leave this here while we go do the book signing and I'll come back and get all this stuff? Yay.